Time to talk about Vladimir Putin. I'll call this video Putin the Great. Hello, I'm Dr. Sam, this is Dr. Sam's Health. Today I continue talking about the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, I have to do it for a variety of reasons. Mostly because this war is ongoing, people are dying and suffering, and despite recent advances of Ukrainian army, Ukraine is still under this partial occupation of Russian forces, and Russian forces still keep shelling my hometown. Unfortunately, despite the fact that my home province was recently liberated completely from Russian forces, they still keep doing this, and I will still keep making these videos to inform English-speaking audiences about what is going on there. And one of the things I would like to talk about is about the great president of great Russia, Vladimir Putin. Right away, I will tell you that a lot of people are asking me questions, knowing that I'm a psychiatrist, about my opinion on his mental health. I think it's a perfect time for my regular disclaimers, which are: I'm a medical professional, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm licensed in Canada, I've got my regulatory bodies, I've got my universities, and I never ever give any kind of medical advice over YouTube, and I would never talk about mental health of any kind of public figures, including Vladimir Putin. And I must say that he has never been my patient, likely will never be, and that's a good thing, but I do not have any kind of factual knowledge about him. I never interviewed him, and in general, even if he was my patient and even I had this kind of knowledge, I would never be able to speak about his mental health. So that would be just highly unethical, and please do not expect me to make any comments in this regard. But at the same time, I have several acquaintances, and by several I mean not one or two or five, like quite a few, who have been talking about Putin, talking about him being a great leader. There were phrases thrown like, you just don't understand. He's a great leader, strong leader. He's doing whatever he can to keep Russia afloat, to keep Russia strong and independent, and so on and so on and so on. And quite frankly, I feel almost offended by this kind of statements, because I don't think he's a great leader. What I would like to talk about is obviously not his mental health. Again, I cannot talk about this, and I will not talk about that. But what I can talk about is my impression and my understanding of him being a leader of his country. And spoiler alert, I honestly think he's a shitty leader, and I think he's a ultimate disgrace and a disaster for his country, and he has to be removed from his position and actually imprisoned and trialed in Hague. But today I would like to talk about my thoughts about his leadership. First, let's talk about him becoming a president in the first place. Prior to him, Russia had pretty nice gentleman whose name was Boris Yeltsin, and at a certain point he made his speech or address to the people of Russia when he said that his famous phrase, "I'm tired, I'm leaving." And what he said essentially was that he cannot longer be a president of Russia, and he would name his successor, the person who would act as a president, a temporary president, who would be Vladimir Putin. And within the next several months, they organized elections, and Vladimir Putin was elected. Must be noted that he is a very odd person to be chosen for this role, both acting as a president, successor, and the president, because he's not really a politician, he's not a businessman, he's a KGB agent, former KGB agent. But as they say in Russia, there are no former KGB agents. And I'm pretty sure that he was never competent enough. He didn't have enough experience and grit to become a president of Russia or any country. And essentially, there was even like a joke that, being true to his original profession, he won the elections without disclosing anything about himself, including his electoral program. Obviously, it's like more of a joke. There must have been some program that was presented to the public, but nobody cared. He has been elected, and I cannot really make any comments about like how legitimate these elections were. The fact is that he has been elected. And being a KGB agent, he started doing things that he did best. He started creating something that we call the vertical of power, meaning he was creating the image and the position of very strong leader who would literally direct everybody under his command. And over the course of many years, he had strengthened this vertical of power, meaning that he had simply eliminated all his competition. Any kind of political leaders, they were suppressed, oppressed, repressed, you name it. Some people have died, some people have been pushed out of the country, some people have been imprisoned. And the end result, which is the common theme for Putin and his regime, is creating a very totalitarian, strong vertical of power with no competition. And I specifically want to kind of pinpoint, highlight the fact that there is no competition, because in my opinion, it's the major issue with his presidency, his presidencies, his regime, and with pretty much any kind of totalitarian regime. I do not believe that any kind of progress is possible without competition. And I specifically mentioned that he's not a politician and he's not a businessman. Essentially, he could not create a good program of development of the country. He cannot push the country or pull the country towards progress, towards anything progressive, towards anything free. All he could do was oppressing people, eliminating any kind of competition, just because he could not compete with real politicians. He could not be a competition to real businessmen. And the only way for him to stay in power was just to strengthen his position and eliminate anybody who could pose a threat to him. And if you remember, Russia used to have quite a few oligarchs. It still has, but it's a very different kind of people. So at that point, maybe a couple of names to refresh your memory. Boris Berezovsky, Khodorkovsky, one of them died in England. Another one was imprisoned and his company was taken away from him. Both of them posed a clear-cut threat to Vladimir Putin, and both of them were eliminated one way or another. And believe me, there were hundreds of people, if not thousands, who were in similar position, who were representing any kind of potential imaginary threat to Putin or even real one, who were eliminated. And over the course of many years, he had created this system where he is obviously at the helm. He is the absolutely authoritarian leader of the country. There is a bunch of cronies, and I mentioned there are other oligarchs, but they are not this kind of oligarchs who create some sort of business empire. No, these are people who are literally being appointed by Putin to manage certain sector of economy, and these are people who have been robbing Russia, sucking its natural resources, gathering huge amounts of finances, money, and passing them to Vladimir Putin and his inner circle. And I don't think there's actually any point to talk about like Russian politics, because realistically this area of the domain of civilization doesn't exist there. There is one party effectively, there is one leader, there are a couple of other parties just to make semblance of some sort of political competition or discourse, but realistically there is only one party, there's one leader, and these people control pretty much everything in this country. Again, There is no competition on political arena, and in order to support that, obviously you need very strong army, you need strong police, you need to have a very strong repressive machine, and these areas of Russian economy actually have been sponsored quite well by the state, which is essentially Vladimir Putin and his inner circle, and even by some oligarchs. And speaking of oligarchs, we can talk about Russian economy. The problem with Russian economy is that, when you're building a very strong vertical of power, you are appointing people who are taking charge of certain areas of like geographical areas, provinces, townships, or sectors of economy. You're creating essentially something akin of like true feudal society. So there are appointees there that might even look that they were elected, but they were never truly elected by the people. They were appointed by Putin and his inner circle and his cronies, and all these people have to do is take charge of certain area of economy or geographical area, take it under their control, and suck out all the resources they can and pass it to Putin and his clique. It might sound like almost like some sort of a dystopian society and that I'm exaggerating, but if you take a deep dive into Russian history, Russian politicum, Russian economy, you will see that that's exactly what is happening. There's a small group of oligarchs that are not really true oligarchs. They're Putin's cronies that control huge sectors of economy. They represent huge corporations that are at least partially owned by the state or by some people who are close to Putin. And these people, all they do, they just like collect some money and redirect the finances to Putin and his group. There is mid-sized business that is, I'm trying to find the right word. Russians use the word krishevать, meaning that every business should have krisha or roof. Oh, we'll call it copper. So, depending on the size of the business, it's a huge business, like very large corporation like Gazprom. It's covered by like Putin's closest people. If we're talking about some mid-sized business, likely it is covered by something that they would call siloviki, or like police, FSB, some other like governors or mayors of the cities. These mid-sized companies, they have multiple people related to Putin's regime who are part of their board of directors, who are having unlimited control over the company, and the real owners or founders of the company usually have been either removed or just like stripped away of all of their belongings. And if something goes wrong, these people somehow either get imprisoned, or they leave the country, or have to leave the country, or they commit suicide or die suddenly. You have been watching the news, likely you have seen how many Russian people of power have died suddenly, sometimes with whole families. And there is obviously some small businesses, and these small businesses are usually, they kind of have to bribe the same vertical of power. So essentially, the reason why I'm talking about all of this is, again, the economy of Russia lacks competition. It runs on some very odd trajectory where there is no stimulus for progress, for invention, for any kind of innovation. And in order to run a business in Russia, you pretty much have to be prepared at a certain point, usually quite early in the process. You'll be covered by somebody and you'll have to pay off these people or have them take over your business. And obviously it doesn't create a good climate for business. And I think that the best illustration of that would be the fact that Russia cannot really make anything on their own. There is no electronics that are made in Russia. I mean, something competitive. Most likely they can make a cell phone that nobody will buy. They can make like 10 laptops and show how amazing Russian laptops are. But they will be just like 10 times heavier and 50 times slower than anything that China can make. And pretty much the whole Russian economy is built around resources. I know that there will be people who will argue with that. You can argue. That's the good part of YouTube. Leave a comment. But again and again and again, Russia is the country that is being called the gas station of Europe or of the world, because pretty much the only thing that they can do well is selling their natural resources. The rest is just production of some shitty goods that, can either be used or consumed by people of Russia. Pretty much nothing can go out of the country, just because, they cannot compete with anything made in the West in terms of quality, and with anything made in China in terms of the price range. So Russian economy stagnates, to say the least. They cannot make any electronics. They cannot make anything actually really good. They are famous for making very shitty cars. And, pretty much if you look at anything in Russia, including, by the way, these famous Russian weapons, Russia cannot produce anything. Even the infamous AK-47 is likely stolen idea design of German firearm. I think it was developed by Hugo Schmeisser, and I think we're talking about something called Sturmgewehr 44. Pardon my German, but there is a very famous firearm that allegedly was stolen by Russians and given to this guy Kalashnikov, who made it his own invention. Actually, you know what? I don't want to smear his name. I don't know enough. It might be just a conspiracy theory, but that's one of the few things that Russia exports, actually, weapons. And we'll talk about weapons in a second. Just wanted to say that the whole Russian economy stagnates. It sucks. In this kind of situation, obviously, you still have to keep the country afloat, and you have to keep your people happy and invested emotionally into your leadership, right? So in order to do so, obviously, they strengthened any kind of police, FSB, KGB, you name it, all kind of enforcement agencies. Also, you have to bolster your propaganda machine. So pretty much all mass media in Russia are very well subordinated to the state, or to Putin himself, or to his oligarchs, which are in turn his cronies. And there is only one opinion in Russia. And if you have been following the news, you likely noticed that Russians cannot say, they were not allowed to call war. They had to call this war with Ukraine as a special military operation. So that's one thing that they have to do. So enforcement agencies, mass media, propaganda, these are two branches of Russian, statesmanship, economy, that are actually heavily invested in. And you have to, bolster some patriotic ideas, talking about great Russia. The problem is that all of these things, they kind of translate into very odd foreign affairs. So imagine that you are running this totalitarian regime, this circus, and there is the rest of the world is like looking at you saying, man, what happened here? You took a country that, like a post-Soviet Union country that had essentially collapsed because of the Soviet Union, like technology and strategies of governing the country. We helped you, hoping that you will become a normal country. You'll become a democracy. You'll have free economy. You will become a decent member of the of the world elites, a fair player on international markets and like any kind of political events and developments. And instead you are recreating Soviet Union, you are oppressing your own people, you're robbing your own country. There is no free speech, there is no free market, there is no democracy. What is happening there? And obviously, the only response that they can give is they can deny it, and they keep oppressing their own people, keep feeding them stories about great Russia. And on international arena, all they can do is just, again, lie, lie, lie. And also, for at least two reasons, they have to meddle in everybody's business. What they can do is they can use small victorious wars to bolster their authority, to show to the world that, everybody has to kind of account for their opinion. Everybody has to be afraid of Russia. Again, it's another stupid strategy. And also, they are trying to use this kind of, they call it like gas blackmail or oil, like pretty much they are trying to leverage other countries using the resources that they have. So, good example with Germany, I think, or Hungary. And in the last several months, we could clearly hear that both Germany and Hungary, they just cannot really oppose Russia, because if Russia stops supplying them with natural resources, the economies of these two countries will collapse or stop, halt. Another good example would be actually Ukraine. And if you have been following the history of Ukraine, I actually spoke about it in a couple of my videos, check them out, the modern history of Ukraine. What they have been doing, they have been using gas, and this gas pipe that goes through Ukraine is one of the major leverages. They were just raising gas prices every time Ukraine dared to disagree with Russia in anything. They actually meddled in Ukrainian politicum. They bought some politicians. They tried to install Viktor Yanukovych twice. First time in 2004, and that was the pivotal moment in Ukrainian history when Ukrainian people actually said, no, we don't want this crook to be our president. Then they changed their tune a little bit, and at a certain point Yanukovych became president for not actually a very short period of time, for a decent period of time, and again and again and again being a puppet for Russia. This person tried to steer away Ukraine from its kind of Western aspirations and return it back to the orbit of Russia. So what Russia really wanted all the time is just to have full or this very significant partial control over Ukrainian economy and politics. Essentially, they are kind of recreating Soviet Union. Again, because a lot of people are nostalgic about Soviet Union in Russia, and in the whole post-Soviet Union countries, there are quite a few people who feel that, collapse of Soviet Union was a terrible thing, that we'll have lost the great country that we used to have. I won't argue with that, but I have to say that it's the pathway to nowhere. Soviet Union collapsed for a reason, just because, again, there was no competition there. There was a very poor version of totalitarian socialism there, and the Soviet Union just could not survive. But they're using it to bolster this idea of great Russia, how Russia supports all the countries, how they were talking about Ukrainians stealing their gas, stealing their agricultural products, that Russians are thieves. Ukrainians are thieves, and Russians are big brothers of Ukraine, and they have been nothing but supportive of Ukraine throughout centuries. Another good example would be Belarus. They have this wonderful totalitarian president there, Lukashenko, has been president there for, I'm pretty sure that since Belarus separated. And a couple of years ago, I think, there was an attempt to remove him from presidency, and this attempt was suppressed by totalitarian Belarusian government with the support of Russia and Russian troops and Russian military, police, you name it. Even if they were not like actively involved, there was always a glooming threat of Russians invading Belarus. Speaking of the all kinds of invasions, obviously, this kind of behavioral issues or behavior on international arena and internal issues with economy and politics, they made Russia engage in multiple military operations or wars all over the world. Just off the top of my head, two Chechen wars. They're very cruel, terrible, catastrophic events that pretty much changed the face of Chechnya. Dagestan, Ossetia, Abkhazia, war in Georgia when they invaded Georgia, Syria. I'm not sure if they were in Iraq, but they meddled there too. Yugoslavia, that I think was the first conflict that Russia participated with Putin being at the helm. Obviously, Crimea, Donbass after that, and the current war. And I must say that just if you look at the chain of events there, they tried to install Yanukovych in 2004. Then when Yanukovych became president and tried to screw up Ukraine big time, they have helped him to escape Ukraine, which is a cowardly act for starters on his behalf. And somehow, without much preparation, they have taken Crimea when the country was in political disarray, and they have been heavily promoting any kind of separatist movement in the eastern and southern areas of Ukraine, which resulted in, I wouldn't call it uprising, but in this long-standing conflict in Donbass, and eventually they were actually supporting the separatists there, and they were instigating and supporting them. And during all this time, they were saying there were no Russian troops there. There's another example of Russian lies. And they ended up actually disclosing it in the last couple of years. There is this guy whose last name is Girkin. He goes by the nickname Strelkov. We'll call him by his real name, Girkin. I think he's a lieutenant colonel or colonel of FSB. I might be wrong, but he was one of the insurgents who actually participated in the uprising in Donbass, and he was heavily supported by Russian troops over the course of at least a year of this conflict there, and later on he was removed, but Russian troops obviously stayed. They were sending humanitarian convoys to Donbass area, supplying separatists, actually terrorists, with all kinds of military equipment, including the one that was used to hit this airplane over Ukraine. And they were causing all kinds of trouble in Ukraine, creating conflict, fueling all kinds of conflicts there. And ultimately, they blamed everything on Ukrainians and invaded Ukraine. Absolutely unjustifiable, terrible war. And since we're talking about this war actually showed a couple of things. First of all, that they are full of shit. And I'm talking about Putin, but there's a huge entourage, and lots of people working for him, supporting him. There's this vertical of power, right? So they were telling Russians, they were indoctrinating them, brainwashing them for years, if not decades, about Ukraine being a nationalistic state. They were killing Russian children, oppressing Russian language, you name it. And Russian military, when they invaded, they actually realized that it's not true. They never found any kind of Nazis in Ukraine, and they were actually treated quite well, especially given that the atrocities that Russian military have been doing in Ukraine. But another important thing is that this special military operation, or let's call it war, because you cannot call it war in Russia, it showed that Russian military sucks. We got this joke, which I personally adore, that by the results of this war, Russian military moved from the second military force in the world to the second military force in Ukraine. So all this military might that everybody was afraid of showed out just to be like a colossus on clay legs. It's just a bubble. And it also showed, the state of Russian army showed that uh, everything, all this money that were invested into Russian military, they were just stolen. It's a completely corrupt system that cannot, again, compete with anybody. And their army is not properly equipped, not properly trained. Their leaders are morons who do not know anything about like military operations. They had the element of surprise. They had all kinds of propaganda working for them. They had all kinds of military equipment, this military might of Russia. They invaded Ukraine and they had their asses handed to them. And it is unbelievable. I actually personally very proud of my Ukrainian compatriots for standing up for this and for fighting them off and fighting back. And they have, I cannot say that they completely destroyed Russian military, but definitely there is no myth anymore about Russian military strength. Russian military sucks. They have outdated rockets that fly back to their own rocket launchers. We have seen quite a few videos of that. They have tanks that do not work, do not shoot. They don't have any kind of precision weapons. They don't have any good electronics. Nothing there is actually even close to what has been advertised or promoted. So Russian military sucks. And I cannot add much to that. But on top of that, this war showed that, returning to Vladimir Putin, that he sucks as a leader. He completely ruined his country to the point that the country that was, like everybody was afraid of Russian military force, turned out to be nothing but a bully. Big, dumb bully. That their military is absolutely terrible, but most importantly, that this war that has begun on February 24th, 2022, they call it special military operation because they were actually planning, and they didn't even have plan B, to invade Ukraine and take over Ukraine in just 3 days, or say a couple of weeks, but not in 7 months of repeatedly receiving blows from Ukrainians. So it is a huge miscalculation on his behalf. And I think that, and I actually explained it in one of my videos, that I think that they lied so much that they started to believe their own lies, their own propaganda. And they are so corrupt that they cannot support their own lies anymore. And essentially, this war led to complete loss of trust to Russian government, even from Russian people, even despite of all this propaganda. They cannot keep lying about not having any losses in Ukraine or doing something noble. It also completely ruined all kinds of international relations of Russia. Lots of businesses have left Russia. Russia had received a terrible blow to their economy. And again and again and again, all of that is the result of this poor leadership by incompetent person who is neither a politician nor a statesman, effectively, nor a businessman. He's a KGB agent, and all he knows is eliminating all kinds of competition and oppressing people. And I think it should be the end of his line. And I honestly hope that people who are watching this video, likely there will not be Russians in Russia just because I'm speaking English, but I honestly want to address to Russians and say, guys, open your eyes. You've got this terrible person, who's a total loser, who's running your country, who's robbing you and your children of your future, who had pushed back, thrown back your country several decades back. It will take decades to restore Russian military, decades to restore Russian economy, decades to restore Russian image. And not only decades of time, it will take not even billions, trillions of dollars of reparations and a lot of asking for forgiveness, things that happened with other countries that were involved in other conflicts in the world. And decades later, their leaders were standing on their knees and asking for forgiveness. And I want to say to you that you have to understand that there is nothing great about your leader. He turned your country, who had a huge potential to become a true, developed, civilized, prosperous country, turned it into literally a shithole, where you cannot say the word war, you cannot have your opinion, you cannot express your opinion, you cannot have a future, you cannot travel, you cannot have anything. And the only person who's responsible for that is Vladimir Putin. So if you ask me what kind of leader he is, I will tell you he's a terrible, terrible leader. And the only thing that can solve pretty much all the problems of your country right now would be removing him from power. Remove him. I'm not saying like eliminating him. Put him in jail. Remove him from power. Apologize. Remove your troops from Ukraine. Start living normal life. Start focusing on yourself. Allow for competition. Allow for free market. Develop your economy. Otherwise, you are doomed to become a way larger equivalent of North Korea. And I don't think any of you want that for yourself or for your children. So that was everything I wanted to say to all of the people who tell me that Putin is a great leader. He is not. Thank you for watching my video. Before I wrap up, I would like to say that I'm still trying to raise some money for Ukrainian Armed Forces, for the people that I know personally who fight in Ukraine. If you feel like participating, let me know. I will provide you with the details and information on how you can support Ukrainian troops. On my part here in Canada, I will keep raising awareness, and I will actually keep helping Ukrainian refugees and immigrants as a psychiatrist, as a physician. And I hope that this war will be over as soon as possible. There will definitely be sequelae of this war for many years, and we have to go through a lot of sad times, unfortunately. But I hope that at a certain point I'll be able to get back to my health and fitness videos. So if you like my videos, or if you just want to support me, please hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave comments. They keep my videos afloat in the top of charts. They make them more visible, and I hope that you will help me to at least spread the word. Again and again and again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Slava Ukraini!